"Get the hell away from my house, you pathetic old leech." Madison threw those words straight at my face, right in front of her fancy guests. I stood in the rain, clutching the warm apple pie in my hands, as my own daughter-in-law smirked and said, "You really think Daniel invited you? Oh God, that's just sad." But only a few minutes later, as she turned her back, laughing smugly with her friends inside the house, the secret token in the pocket of my coat started to vibrate. That call, from someone Madison never wanted me to hear from, flipped the entire game. And with just one sentence, my spine turned to ice. "Evelyn, are you ready to learn the truth about your daughter-in-law?" Because after that night, Madison's true identity was ripped wide open, from the perfect wife to a woman once investigated for scamming elderly people across 2 different states. If you were in my place, would you walk into that house and expose Madison right at her own dinner table? Or would you stay silent and use her own weapons to destroy the life she built on lies? Comment continue if you want to hear the twist that forced Madison to drop to her knees in front of me. And don't forget to follow, because this story is only just beginning. I am Evelyn Hart, a dark-skinned American woman, 70 years old, living quietly in a small house in Portland, Oregon. 10 years have passed since my husband John died, and my life since then has been a cycle of managing everything alone and using every bit of my savings to support my son Daniel and his wife Madison Cooper. I paid for Eli's school tuition, covered the bills Daniel didn't have the courage to mention, and even paid most of the mortgage on the house they live in. Daniel is quiet, gentle, but too easily swayed. Madison, on the other hand, is the opposite. She is beautiful, cold, and always looks at me like I'm an outdated object someone forgot to throw away. For years, I tried to ignore that look, believing that if I was patient enough, the family would eventually feel warm again. That evening, Daniel called to invite me to dinner after 3 long months of not seeing each other. I prepared an apple pie, bought the toy Eli liked, and took the bus to their house. Light rain dampened my shoulders as I stepped onto their brightly lit porch. I still carried a small spark of excitement, hoping Madison would be kinder tonight. But the moment the door opened, I knew I was wrong. Madison's face appeared cold as glass. She looked at me from my head to the apple pie in my hands, then frowned. I didn't even have time to greet her before she dropped the sentence that froze every muscle in me. "You came early. For what? Someone like you belongs out in the rain." Then the door slammed shut in my face. No hesitation, no pity, not even the smallest courtesy. I heard the wind pushing against the roof, and Daniel stood right behind his wife. I saw his shadow through the glass panel, head bowed, like a boy afraid of being scolded. That moment crushed me, not because of the rain, but because my own son stayed silent. The rain grew heavier. I stood there, my hands trembling from the cold. Water pooled across the pavement, and my heart felt like it was being squeezed dry. I didn't know what I had done to deserve such a cruel humiliation. I didn't knock again, not out of calmness, but because my legs felt nailed to the wet ground. After a long while through the thin strip of warm light spilling from the doorframe, I saw Madison appear again. She didn't look at me. She just opened the door a sliver and handed out a thick envelope to someone standing close beside the wall. A strange man in a black coat. I hadn't even realized he was standing there. Rain soaked through his shoulders, but what unsettled me wasn't his sudden presence. It was the way Madison whispered to him, as if exchanging something Daniel must never discover. I stepped back slightly, trying to see more clearly. He folded the envelope, tucked it into his inner pocket, then slowly turned his head toward me. The look he gave made a chill crawl straight down my spine. It wasn't the startled look of a man caught by surprise. It was the look of someone who already knew who I was, who knew exactly what I had witnessed, and wanted to warn me that seeing something not meant for you often comes with consequences. The rain poured harder, merging with the suffocating silence around me. In that moment, I realized this night wasn't just a cruel rejection. It was the beginning of a fear I had never known, a kind of dread that whispered my life was about to unravel. I remained there, shivering, drenched to the bone, as the strange man finally walked away, giving me one last deliberate look before disappearing into the curtain of rain. The rain had eased when the party inside began to wind down. I still stood under the awning, the cold sinking into my hands. Through the glass panel, I watched Daniel walk the last guests out, trying to appear polite despite the exhaustion flickering across his face. As the final guest stepped off the porch, Daniel bent down to pick up a fallen handkerchief, and in that moment, a small metallic clink hit the wet stone. Something slid out of his coat pocket and fell right at my feet. I bent down to pick it up, the yellow porch light reflecting off a surface, old yet painfully familiar. It was the safe key belonging to John Hart, my husband. The key I had searched for years after his death, believing it disappeared along with whatever secrets he left behind. I froze as I recognized the tiny engraving along the side. The same mark John once said he had made so no one could copy it. There was no mistaking it. I lifted my head to look at Daniel, questions storming through me. Daniel saw what was in my hand and jolted as if shocked. He rushed toward me, his voice sinking low. "Mom, how could it be here?" His words broke off, his eyes darting away, trapped somewhere between fear and confusion. I always knew my son was soft, but never had I seen him unsettled like this, as if the appearance of that key carried a meaning he desperately didn't want revealed. I asked whether he knew where the key came from. Daniel shook his head, but not fully. It was the kind of shake that hid more than it denied. He touched his forehead, swallowed hard, then leaned against the doorframe like someone who had just witnessed a cruel joke. I slipped the key into my coat pocket, and that simple act made Daniel even more panicked. "Mom, you shouldn't keep it. There are things I don't want you getting pulled into." The vague warning chilled me more than my soaked clothes ever could. When Daniel walked back inside to close the door, the phone in my coat vibrated. A long, steady pulse, heavy like a knock coming from a place with no light. I pulled it out. The screen showed no name, only a strange sequence of numbers. I wanted to ignore it, but my hand stiffened as if something insisted I answer. I lifted the phone to my ear. A breath filled the line before a man's voice emerged, low and slow, as if it traveled from the end of a dark room. "Evelyn, you're holding the one thing Madison fears most," my voice caught. I stood still beneath the awning where the last drops of rain clung to the edges, my chest tightening like an invisible hand squeezing my lungs. I didn't have time to ask who he was before he continued, his voice sharpening as though he had been watching me for a long time. "Don't let her take it back. You don't understand what she did to earn her place in your family." My eyes scanned the street, my palm beginning to sweat. The neighborhood was strangely silent, lit only by the porch lights reflecting off the wet stones. I looked at Daniel's door, where Madison had disappeared after her heels struck the floor. She could be cruel, selfish, vicious in her words, but why would she fear an old safe key of John's? I tried to steady myself and asked what he wanted. He paused as if choosing the most painful truth to hand me. "I want you to know everything." But the truth isn't in what I say, Evelyn. It's in the safe you're about to open. My chest tightened. I had never told anyone about the existence of that safe, not even after John died. So how did this stranger know? And why call exactly when the key hit the ground at Daniel's home? "Who are you?" I demanded. A long silence followed, as if he were preparing to tear something open inside me. I'm the one who knows why Madison married Daniel. A cold shiver snapped down my spine, sharp enough to numb my skin. My breath stuck midway as I stared at the wet porch, still smelling faintly of rust and damp stone. He didn't say it to scare me, but as if stating something he had known all along. In that moment, I felt clearly that this call wasn't ending anything, but opening a door to truths I might never be ready to face. Yet his voice still lingered, holding back the darkest part for last. "Evelyn, you are not the only one Madison has targeted. I'll call again when you're ready." The line dropped, the screen fading into black. The rain tapped in steady rhythm, but inside me something had begun to shift. Years of endurance and silence compressed into a single unfamiliar feeling rising in my chest. Just as dread rooted itself deeper, Daniel's front door flung open, light spilling onto me, and footsteps approached. I looked up, unable to understand yet, as a figure stepped directly in front of me, blocking the way. The first thought that struck me was whether he had anything to do with the call I had just received. The man standing in front of me was not some shadow connected to the party. Under the weak yellow light from the porch, his face came into view, mature, sharp, his dark eyes seeming to examine every inch of me. He introduced himself as Noah Wallace, a name I had heard John mention many years ago, but had never met. His appearance at the exact moment the call ended unsettled me, giving me the feeling I had stepped into a room full of secrets, and the door had already locked behind me. Noah watched me for a moment, as if deciding whether I was strong enough to hear what he was about to say. I leaned against the porch pillar, my hand still gripping the key inside my coat pocket, my chest tightening with each breath. Noah spoke in a low, firm tone, as though he had recited these words to himself many times before coming here. "I worked with John," Noah began, his eyes drifting toward the house behind me. "We investigated a scheme targeting the elderly, taking advantage of people who were lonely or trusting." My chest tightened at hearing the words John and investigated in the same sentence. My husband had never told me anything about it. Noah continued, slowly recalling nights John met him in an old bar where they quietly shared information about a group of cross-state scammers. Scattered documents, blurry printed photos of suspects, anonymous calls pressing in during the last months of John's life. Each detail landed on my shoulders like added weight. When John died, Noah said, I knew something was wrong, because he died right when he was about to expose a very important name in that group. I forced myself to steady my voice and ask directly who that person was. Noah looked at me quiet for a few seconds, as if preparing to lift a curtain, hiding a deep ravine behind it. I think you already know before you ask, he said. Madison. The cold spread from my hands up my spine. That name felt like a blade driven into the fragile place I had tried so long to keep calm. I shook my head instinctively, struggling to accept that my daughter-in-law could be connected to such crimes. But Noah reached into his coat and pulled out a worn dossier, the corners frayed. He placed it into my hands without hesitation. This is her file, Noah said. I opened the dossier. The first line made my heartbeat stagger. Real name Maggie Walters. A birth year completely different from the one Madison gave Daniel on their wedding day. I turned the page, where entire lines of legal records from 2 states were listed. A string of accusations exploiting elderly victims, taking advantage of trust-forming emotional relationships to access finances, then disappearing with large sums. Madison's name appeared in police reports next to a blurry photo that still captured her cold, sharp expression. I gripped the edge of the paper, my fingers numb. Each line felt like a fresh cut across my chest. For years, I had told myself my daughter-in-law was simply difficult, sharp-tongued, temperamental, as if convincing myself that her presence was something I could endure if I just stayed patient. Now, every suspicion I had dismissed returned in a wave of dread. I pictured Madison's disdainful eyes, the envelope she slipped to the strange man, the way she shut the door on me in the rain. Everything aligned in a way that made me take a step back. Noah seemed to expect this reaction. "I know it's hard to believe," he said, "but listen to this." He took out his phone and showed me an old message John had sent him before he died. Only a few lines, but enough to make my entire body tremble. I found the link. Maggie Walters is living under a new name. If I don't see you again, find Evelyn. She must know. My hand dropped the dossier, almost slipping. My heart pounded, my head spinning, as if I had stepped down a dark staircase and missed the next step entirely. I couldn't catch my breath before Noah gently pushed the dossier back toward me. She didn't choose Daniel out of love. His voice was even steady, absolute. She chose him because of you, because of the money, because of your age, because of what she could extract from a family with a mother who trusts too easily. The wind slid into my coat, chilling me, but never as deeply as the truth pressing against my ribs. I realized I had never been simply disliked. I had been targeted. Every gift I bought, every bill I covered, every moment I allowed Madison to belittle me, all of it became another piece of rope she tightened around my life. Noah locked eyes with me and delivered the final blow. John died right when he was about to expose her group. My legs weakened, and I had to hold on to the porch pillar to stay upright. It felt like everything in my life had split open, revealing a black void underneath. I wanted to ask more, wanted to know why Noah had come now, wanted to know if John's death was truly an accident, but my words died in my throat. Noah folded the dossier, put it back into my hands, then stepped back. "Now you understand why I had to reach you before she does." I looked down at the dossier, then at Noah's heavy gaze. In that moment, I understood that Madison was not merely cold or cruel. She was something else entirely, something dangerous that I had only begun to uncover. And just as I tried to gather myself, Noah delivered one more sentence that froze the breath in my chest. "Evelyn, she knows I came to see you tonight." The door behind me swung open. Someone stepped onto the porch. I turned, my heart racing, knowing the person standing there might be the one I feared most to face. I stepped into the dark house where the years of my marriage with John still lingered in the old walls. The feeling Noah left behind clung to me as if every word he said was pushing me toward a threshold I had avoided for so long. I removed my coat, placed the safe key on the table, my heart heavy as if weighed down. Perhaps it was time to do what I had hesitated to do for 10 years. The room containing the safe was at the end of the hallway, once John's study. I had never cleaned it because every time I opened the door, the image of him writing under the small lamp returned so vividly. As I stepped in, the air felt colder, the dimness of the room frozen in the exact moment John left this world. I knelt before the gray safe, my hands trembling as I inserted the key. The click of the lock was not loud, but it echoed inside me like an unavoidable confirmation. The safe door opened, the scent of old paper rising and tightening my chest. On top was a small envelope with the familiar handwriting I had avoided for years, Evelyn. I sat down, opening the envelope with hands that could no longer stay steady. The paper inside shook slightly with my breaths, the words written hastily but aching with sorrow. Evelyn, don't trust Madison, save yourself. I gripped the letter, tears rising, no matter how much I tried to hold them back. Those words felt like the second blade from the man I loved, reminding me he had seen something I refused to believe. I wondered what John had discovered, how terrified he must have been when he learned the truth about the woman Daniel called his wife. Beneath the letter was a stack of documents. I lifted them and my heart dropped. It was a copy of my bank statements showing a withdrawal of $60,000 made right after Daniel's birthday 2 years ago. The paper displayed Daniel's signature, but one glance was enough for me to recognize it wasn't his. The lines wavered, clumsy, trying to imitate familiarity, but exposing their falseness. I placed my finger on the signature, the sting of betrayal mixing with the numbness in my chest. I thought of the months Daniel seemed uneasy, mentioning financial struggles, the times Madison suggested I help a bit more. Words that once sounded casual now weighed down like a tightening rope. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands not to shake as I turned to the last layer in the safe. A set of photographs fell to the floor face down, the edges creased. I picked one up, turned it over, and nearly dropped it. The face in the photograph belonged to the strange man I saw the night Madison threw me out of the house. He stood next to John in a parking lot as if exchanging something important. On the back was an internal mark from the agency John once worked with, confirming the man in the photo was a suspect linked to the fraud ring. I flipped through more photos and found Madison a few steps from him, her expression cold, far from the gentle daughter-in-law she pretended to be before Daniel. The fragments of a terrible picture snapped into place. Madison had not met Daniel by chance. She had studied my family, learned about my savings, seen how trusting Daniel was, seen how lonely I had become. I placed everything back into the safe, though I didn't close it. I needed to look again to be certain I wasn't losing my mind. But the more I looked, the sharper each dot on the paper became, the deeper each image sank into me. John had died trying to protect me from something that had already stepped into my home, wearing the face of my daughter-in-law. I stood up, still holding the photograph of the strange man. The years of enduring and keeping the peace felt like useless fragments. The pain inside me tightened, giving way to something stronger, clearer, burning faintly in my chest. I knew I had no way back. I had to confront Madison, not with patience, but with every truth I had uncovered. I gripped the safe key, stepped out of the room, and when the door closed behind me, I knew my life had shifted in a direction where blindness no longer had a place. As I reached the hallway, a loud sound erupted from the front door, as if someone had slammed it hard. I turned, my heartbeat pounding, knowing the moment I confronted Madison was coming sooner than I expected. I stood before the mansion, dressed in strands of golden light, laughter spilling from inside, like needles pressing into my chest. Tonight was the party Madison bragged about to the entire city, the place where she wore her most perfect mask. I gripped the envelope in my hand, its weight feeling like it carried the fate of my whole family. As I stepped through the door, I felt the judgmental gazes of the wealthy guests Madison always clung to for prestige. Madison appeared immediately, lips curling into a sharp smile, her eyes sliding over me as if I had just ruined the atmosphere of her carefully curated evening. She stepped closer, her voice low enough to keep her dignity intact, but sharp enough to slice through my skin. "You embarrassed my guests. You know that." I looked into her cold eyes and saw the deepening contempt. In that moment, I realized Madison truly believed she had won, that I remained the weak mother-in-law who trembled under every insult she threw. I didn't respond. I simply placed the envelope on the buffet table where the lights hit it just the way I intended. Madison glanced at it, suspicion flickering across her face, before shifting into satisfaction. She thought I had brought an overdue apology or some plea for forgiveness, and that illusion made her lips lift even higher. Exactly what I needed. Madison always grew loudest when she believed her opponent had collapsed. I stepped back to watch. Madison couldn't resist curiosity. She looked around to see if anyone was paying attention so she could perform her role as the offended but generous hostess, then quickly picked up the envelope. I saw her hand tremble slightly, not with fear, but with excitement at the thought that I had surrendered. I held my breath as the light brushed across her face. That simple envelope was the perfect bait, because inside it was nothing she expected. I hadn't finished observing Madison when the banquet door opened again. Noah walked in his dark coat, stretching a long shadow across the tiled floor. Whispering erupted instantly, guests turning, some recognizing him and murmuring. His presence sliced through the polished atmosphere Madison had worked so hard to maintain. I noticed Madison's hand freeze around her glass for a fraction of a second. Noah didn't weave through the crowd. He headed straight for the center of the room where every eye could land on him. He gave me a brief look and a small nod, like a signal, before turning to face the entire gathering. The music softened as people sensed the shift. My heart thudded, fueled not by fear, but by the knowledge that Madison's escape route was shrinking fast. Madison tried to keep her composure, though the tension in her voice betrayed her. "Noah Wallace, what are you doing here?" Her tone stretched thin, and several guests glanced at each other. Noah smiled, a smile that chilled me in a way I couldn't explain. He raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear every syllable. "I have an important announcement." A soft clink of glass on a table, the scrape of a chair, and the room fell into waiting silence. Madison stepped back slightly, hiding her hand behind her dress, her body reacting before her mind could. A thin line of sweat slid down her temple despite the cool air. Noah swept his gaze across the room, then let it rest on Madison longer than necessary. Someone in this room is living under a false identity. The room jolted as if struck by an electric current, and Madison's hand crushed the bait envelope so tightly the paper wrinkled beneath her fingers. I watched her, knowing the contents of John's safe. Every warning Noah had given me, every truth I had discovered were now circling her throat, and I felt unmistakably that the real storm had just begun. The air in the room felt frozen after Noah's last words. I stood among the circle of people, my heart pounding heavily in my chest. Madison stayed rooted where she was, fingers digging into the edge of the table, her face pale. The room held a web of uncertain glances, but no one leaned toward either side. They were waiting for something, a piece of proof no one could deny. Noah pulled a USB from his coat and plugged it into the large screen at the end of the hall. I saw Daniel's shoulders tremble as the screen lit up. He looked at me, then at Madison, then at Noah, as if any one of us could tell him where he was supposed to stand. Panic wrapped around Daniel, sweeping him into the whirlpool Madison had spun for years. Noah pressed play. The first image was a dim old nursing home room, yellow lights blurring at the edges, a camera perched high. Madison sat across from an elderly man with silver hair and clouded Alzheimer's eyes. Her voice echoed clearly the moment the clip began. "Just sign here. I'll keep your money safe for you." The old man flipped the paper, his gaze drifting. Madison smiled sweetly, but her hand on the table stayed firm, like she was guiding him with invisible strings. The angle shifted, showing her receiving a thick envelope. Her eyes in the video were sharp, cold, and familiar. The party fell into complete silence. Only when the video ended did the sound of breath return, uneven and shaken. Madison slammed her hand against the table. "This video is edited. You people are trying to destroy me." Her voice cracked sharply enough to make Daniel recoil. Madison lunged toward the screen as if wanting to tear it apart. She whipped around at me. "You're behind this, aren't you? You and that Noah guy are trying to ruin my life." I lifted my gaze. "You ruined it. I just turned on the light so others could see." Madison screamed. "No one should believe this. I'm being framed." "This old woman has hated me from the beginning. All of you want me out of this family." Daniel stepped back. "Madison, say something. You need to explain. I don't understand any of this." His voice cracked like shattered glass. I saw his hands shake violently. He looked at Madison, but her darting eyes only deepened his panic. The man I had raised stood at the crossroad between truth and betrayal, yet he was too broken to choose a side. Madison grabbed his hand. "Daniel, trust me. I'm the victim. I've never done anything wrong." Daniel stared at her hand as if it no longer belonged to someone he knew. "Maddie, why are you taking money in that video? Why did you make him sign those papers?" Madison's breath hitched. "Who are you listening to? Whose side are you on? Mine or theirs?" I watched Daniel clutch his hair, eyes frantic. I don't know. I don't understand anything." No one in the room made a sound. Every set of eyes was fixed on the collapsing marriage in front of them. My heart twisted for Daniel. I understood his pain, understood the feeling of having the ground pulled out from beneath you. But I also saw how Madison was trying to use his weakest moment to drag him back under her control one last time. Madison turned toward me, her eyes burning. "You want me destroyed, don't you? You want Daniel to leave me. You want this family to fall apart." I answered with a low, steady voice. "I want the truth. If that destroys this family, then the cause is you, not me." Madison let out a bitter laugh. "The truth? Those pathetic papers are what you call truth?" I looked toward Noah. He stood silent, waiting for the precise moment to thrust the final blade. Noah stepped into the center of the room. "If you think this video is fake," he said, voice deepening, "then do you want to see evidence stronger than the video?" Madison froze. Daniel lifted his head. I gripped my sleeve. Noah pulled a thin stack of documents from his pocket. Under the lights, the cover gleamed. He looked at me, then at Madison. "This evidence," he said, "cannot be denied." A tight ache filled my chest. The room held its breath, waiting for him to open the file. But Noah didn't open it yet. He said one sentence, "And it will show Daniel who he actually married from the very first day." My pulse stumbled. Madison stepped back, her lips trembling. Daniel stood frozen. I knew whatever came next would shatter the last shield Madison had left. Noah placed his hand on the file. The confrontation was about to strike directly at the truth no one in that room was ready to face. He drew in a breath, preparing to open it. And the room seemed to bend toward the moment the final revelation would begin. Noah stood in the center of the room, his hand resting on the edge of the file, as if pressing down would shatter the entire party. I heard Daniel swallow hard, while Madison took another step back, her spine nearly hitting the wine counter. Everyone around us held their breath. Their eyes no longer held curiosity, but fear, as if they had suddenly realized they were attending a party with a criminal standing among them. Noah opened the file. The first page hit the room like a blow. Madison Cooper equals Maggie Walters, fugitive suspect. Murmurs burst like flames catching dry leaves. I saw Madison grip the counter so tightly her nails scraped the wood. She tried to speak, but the sound died in her throat as though something had clenched around it. Noah lifted a photo of Madison from years ago, back when she used the name Maggie, her hair shorter, her eyes sharper. "This is her real identity," Noah said. "A suspect investigated in 2 states for scamming the elderly and taking their assets." Madison shook her head, lips trembling. That's not me." Noah turned toward Daniel. "Look at her. That face is the same person living in your house." Daniel collapsed into a chair, both hands clutching his head. "No, Madison would never do that. It's impossible." My heart twisted as I watched him. He was still trying to fight the truth, even as it laid itself bare in front of him. While Daniel crumpled the back doors suddenly opened, 2 officers entered the room, followed by Officer Green. Guests parted instantly, forming a clear path through the center of the hall. Madison froze, eyes widening when Green lifted a photo in his hand. "We're here for the suspect, Maggie Walters," Green announced. "She's present at this event according to a witness report." At that exact moment, a loud crash sounded near the entrance. The man I had seen the previous night burst into the room, sprinting toward the emergency exit. Guests screamed, but the officers moved faster. Within seconds, he was slammed to the floor, his hands wrenched behind his back. The entire room stiffened as his face pressed to the carpet, hair disheveled, unmistakably the same man who had taken the envelope from Madison under the rain. Madison shrieked, her voice cracking. "You're framing me! I didn't do anything wrong. I don't even know him." Noah answered calmly. "He's your accomplice, and he just confirmed your name while being arrested, Madison." Madison's knees buckled as she caught herself on the table. Everyone around her stepped back as if scared of touching the woman they had been toasting drinks with minutes earlier. Their eyes held no contempt like they once aimed at me, but fear and revulsion. I looked at Madison. Her face no longer showed arrogance or disdain. It was pure panic, a panic of someone who realized there was nowhere left to run. "You, all of you, want to destroy me." She glared at me, shaking. "I only wanted a decent life. Daniel loves me. I deserve happiness." I stepped forward. "Happiness isn't built on lies, Madison, and the person you hurt isn't me. It's Daniel." Daniel lifted his head. The pain in his eyes shifted into something sharper, something awakening. "How long have you been lying to me?" Madison shook her head rapidly. "Daniel, everything I did was for us." Daniel stood, his voice strained. "For us? Or for my mother's money?" Madison stumbled back as if slapped. "No, you misunderstood. I was forced." She pointed at the handcuffed man. "He's the one behind all this. He controlled me." Noah crossed his arms. "Let's see if he agrees." The officers dragged the accomplice past Madison. He turned his head, low but clear. "Maggie, don't drag me down with you. You planned everything." The room erupted in gasps. Madison screamed, shaking, like her entire facade had just been torn away. "Lies! Everything is lies!" Officer Green stepped forward. "Miss Madison Cooper, or Maggie Walters, we need you to cooperate with the investigation." All eyes locked on Madison. No hesitation, no confusion now. She was no longer the glamorous hostess, but a suspect surrounded by witnesses. Madison's voice cracked, her fingers clawing at the table. I'm not going anywhere. I want a lawyer. Green took a step closer, his tone flat. A lawyer will be provided. But before we take anyone out of this room, he scanned the hall, we need to confirm the suspect's identity. He lifted the old photo of Madison as Maggie, then called out loudly enough to shake the entire event hall. Who here is Madison Cooper? I looked at Madison just as her legs buckled beneath her, as though she had heard her life's final verdict, and I knew the storm had only begun. The room sank into a heavy silence after Officer Green's question. Madison stood in the center of the hall, lips trembling, eyes darting like an animal cornered with no escape. When Green stepped closer, the photo of Maggie Walters still raised in his hand, Madison's legs buckled. I heard the sharp gasp leave her throat, the scrape of her dress against the floor ringing sharply through the hall. Madison collapsed to her knees in front of me, both hands grabbing the hem of my dress like a drowning person clinging to the last thing floating. Evelyn, please, I can't go to prison. Her voice broke into pieces, her eyes wide with terror, mascara smudged across her cheeks like the last mask melting off her face. I looked down at the woman who had once pushed me into the rain, once shut the door in my face, once stood inside my son's home, calling me a burden, a useless old woman. Now she knelt, shaking at my feet, begging me to save her from the consequences she had built with her own hands. If you save me, Madison pleaded between sobs, I'll change, I swear. I'll treat you well. I'll do anything. Just speak up for me. I leaned down so our faces were level. Madison, I said softly, 3 hours in the rain that night were nothing compared to this. Her eyes widened, tears pouring harder. You want revenge because I said something I shouldn't have, Evelyn? I was stressed, I was exhausted, I didn't mean to hurt you. I held her gaze steady and cutting, the way justice sometimes requires. You didn't hurt only me, I said. You stole my money, you deceived Daniel, and you caused my husband's death when he tried to expose you. That wasn't a slip of the tongue, Madison. That was a crime. Madison screamed, wrapping her arms around my legs again. Evelyn, please, please save me. I'll do anything you want. Anything. Just don't let them take me away. You're the only one who can help me. I stepped back, letting her hands fall to the floor. I'm not something for you to cling to, I replied. The ones you should beg are the people you harmed and the justice you ran from. Officer Green signaled to the 2 officers behind him. They stepped forward and grabbed Madison's arms, lifting her from the floor. She thrashed wildly. No! Don't take me. I'm innocent. Evelyn, say something. You used to need me. No, I said, my voice firm as stone. You used to need me, and you chose betrayal. The officers hoisted Madison upright. The cold snap of the handcuffs echoed through the hall, making several guests flinch. I looked around. No one stepped forward to defend her. No one reached out to comfort her. They all stepped back, avoiding her eyes, as though avoiding a flame. Madison staggered as they pulled her forward, screaming between gasps, I don't deserve this. I'm being set up. None of you understand anything. But no one answered. As they dragged her past me, she swung her head back, her eyes blazing with hatred and despair. And right then, she screamed the one sentence everyone heard clearly. Daniel will choose me, not you. Her voice ripped through the hall like a blade, the final strike she hurled at me before being pulled away. Daniel stood frozen, face pale, hands clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white. I looked at my son, seeing a storm building behind his eyes, and I knew that after those words, Daniel's decision would change all our lives. The room held its breath, waiting for him to speak. But Daniel turned to me, his eyes burning with turmoil, and that moment became the threshold before every last truth would be stripped bare. Daniel opened his mouth, and I knew whatever he was about to say would end every illusion Madison still clung to. The courtroom felt cold and bright, the sound of pages turning, breaking the stillness as everyone settled into their seats. I stood in the row reserved for victims, my hands clasped tightly beneath the wooden table. In front of me, Madison sat with light restraints, her hair disheveled, her face worn after days in custody. Gone were the red lipstick and the proud posture, leaving only the stripped-down truth of someone forced to face what she had tried to outrun. When the clerk read the list of evidence, Madison lowered her head, and Daniel sat to the right, pressing his palms hard against his knees. The evidence included the video of her taking money from an Alzheimer's patient, the withdrawal slip for $60,000 with my forged signature, her old arrest warrant under the name Maggie Walters, and John's final letter sealed in an evidence pouch. Whispers rippled through the gallery like small blades slicing into the already strained air. When the prosecutor read aloud the contents of John's letter, his voice echoed evenly through the silent room. "Evelyn, do not trust Madison. Save yourself. I have uncovered what she hid. If you are reading this, it means everything has gone beyond my control." Every line was another cut, making me see more clearly the darkness my husband had faced in silence before he fell. Suddenly, Madison jumped to her feet, her chair crashing behind her. Her face twisted in desperation, her eyes red and wild, as if they might burst. "No, it's all fabricated. They hate me, so they framed me." Her scream tore through the courtroom, startling several people. Then she snapped her head toward Daniel, her voice shattered, but carried a fierce, cornered rage. "Daniel, who do you choose?" The sound rang through the chamber, a mix of terror and fury slicing through the air. Daniel froze for several seconds, his lips trembling. I could see the conflict raging inside him. He had never been forced to choose between the wife he once protected and the mother who raised him his entire life. The courtroom held its breath, some people stopping mid-inhale, waiting for the answer that could not be taken back. Daniel slowly rose to his feet. The simple movement hit the room like the thud of a judge's gavel. He stared at Madison for a long, agonizing moment, his expression torn between pain and anger. Then he breathed in deeply, turning first toward the judge, then toward me. Finally, he shouted with all the strength he had been holding back, "I choose my mother because she never betrayed me, and you betrayed everyone." The words exploded through the chamber like a cannon blast, making some people flinch as if struck. Madison collapsed back into her chair, her eyes widening with shock and disbelief. You... Her words crumbled apart, breaking under the weight of her breath. Daniel turned away, refusing to look at her. He covered his face with his hand, but I still saw the trembling in his shoulders. He wasn't crying aloud, but the quiet collapse inside him pierced my chest. I understood this moment would mark him forever. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, pulling the courtroom back into order. Order in the court. He looked down at the thick stack of documents before him, turned a few pages, then gazed at Madison for a long, expressionless moment. The atmosphere tightened, becoming dense enough to suffocate. I felt each beat of my heart each second stretching into something unbearably long. All eyes fixed on the bench where the judge sat poised to deliver his verdict. Madison folded over the table, her lips shaking, her hands gripping each other as if begging for a miracle. The judge lifted his head. He adjusted his glasses and stared directly at Madison with an icy sharpness. No one spoke. No one moved. Then he opened his mouth to read the sentence. The judge looked directly at Madison, his voice echoing steadily through the heavy air of the courtroom. Everything that had happened since that rainy night seemed to gather into one long breath from him before he read the verdict. I heard every word clearly, each one falling like a stone into a deep well. The defendant, Madison Cooper, also known as Maggie Walters, is sentenced to 7 years in prison for fraud document forgery and elder abuse. Madison nearly collapsed where she stood, her hands trembling violently inside the cuffs. She lifted her head, but her eyes were empty, stripped of the fire she once used to intimidate everyone around her. Any arguments she had tried earlier were gone, replaced by a helpless unraveling she could no longer hide. When the officers stepped forward to take her away, her footsteps dragged across the floor, heavy as though she was being pulled down by the weight of the very crimes she once dismissed. I remained still in that moment, not triumphant, not angry, just releasing a breath that had been trapped inside me for years. The silence in the courtroom deepened as if everyone present understood the pain of a mother who had faced betrayal and followed it to its final conclusion. Daniel stood behind me, his hands tightly clasped. As soon as the officers guided Madison out the door, he stepped forward. His face lowered, his eyes reddened, like someone who had just awakened from a long, painful dream. "Mom," Daniel said in a shaking voice, "I chose the wrong person for too long." He sank to his knees on the courtroom floor, his hands reaching for mine, as though afraid I might slip away. "I made you stand in the rain. I stayed silent when you were insulted. I let someone like Madison wedge herself between us. Mom, I'm sorry." I placed my hand on his shoulder, and a deep ache rose in my chest. It wasn't for my suffering anymore, but for my son, who now had to sever the illusions he had held on to for so many years. "Daniel," I whispered, "you came back at the right moment. That's enough." He bowed his head into my hands like someone who had been lost and finally found a path again. From that moment on, I knew that as long as he remained honest and committed to walking toward the light, our family could be rebuilt. In the weeks that followed, I returned to my small home. Morning sunlight slipped through the windows, brushing against the warm cup of tea I brewed each day. I sat at my table, setting before me the blank pages I had long intended to fill. The stories of women who had been used, dismissed, or stripped of their voice seemed to wait for me to reach them. I founded Grandmothers Rising, a support group for older women exploited financially or emotionally by their own families. It began with a few friends, then grew to dozens, then hundreds. They didn't come to complain, they came to stand up. I shared my story with them piece by piece, never embellishing, never hiding. And the strange thing was that each time I retold it, I felt lighter, stronger, as if the pain I once carried had been reshaped into the foundation of a new life. One afternoon, as I stood before those women, the evening light pouring through the window, I heard my own voice ring out firm and bright. "I am Evelyn Hart. I once stood in the rain for 3 hours, but for the rest of my life, I walk in the light." The room fell silent for a few seconds, then erupted into applause that bounced off the walls and into my chest like the steady heartbeat of something reborn. And in that moment, I understood that the rain from years ago did not come to punish me. It came to cleanse everything. to open a path for the light I now walk in.